Evan is the founder of a really interesting organization called Empathy Media Lab. Empathy Media Lab is a multi-service enterprise. It's based in Maryland, and it does things like publish content on labor and the political economy, art and culture, and they also provide event space and studio space and podcast space for artists and activists who want to share their stories in a global format. And Mr. Papp, I'm going to let him talk more about this enterprise, but I wanted to just sort of introduce him as well, because Mr. Papp brings to this work over a decade of experience in consulting and developing and managing communications for a whole host of different types of organizations, including the US government and private industry and nonprofits. And he has also launched several startups, which I find it very interesting, including a permaculture farm and an international labor radio and podcast network. He spent 5 years in the Peace Corps before doing that, working in areas like emergency health and rural education and public outreach. He has a master's degree in public policy, and he earned his bachelor's degree in philosophy and political science. So Evan, your breadth and depth of commitment is stunning. And I am very, very pleased, and we are very fortunate to have you with us this evening.
Thank you so much for this opportunity to talk to new people and meet new people, and also see some old faces as well. And I'm going to talk a little bit about my origin story, and then get into Empathy Media Lab, share some content, and then provide some time for answering any questions. And of course, I want to just put it out there right now that if you have to jump off early or something like that, I want to be as accessible as possible, because I've only gotten here through the help of a lot of other people who've helped me along the way and kind of allow me to overcome different obstacles and different things that, that seemed unsolvable. And then just one person can come in 5 minutes kind of help with that solution. So the main takeaways I want to share, and a lot of people, you're still in undergrad and you're still trying to figure out which way you want to go. And there's going to be a lot of people who's going to be putting pressure on you that this is the way or that's the way. And that's going to be based from their own experience. But the main takeaways, and I'm going to emphasize it now and at the end, but the most valuable thing in all of our lives is our attention. And where we put our attention and who we give our attention to and what we give our attention to, that will determine the path of our life. So try to, and our attention is constantly being competed, especially now with all the social media and everything else. There's a lot of competition for everyone's attention. And being in media myself, I'm also trying to compete for people's attention. And I'm also aware of my own lack of attention sometimes, when I'm just mindlessly scrolling through social media and things like that. But attention is the most valuable thing in anyone's life, and guard it and cultivate it and strengthen it and your ability for attention. Another takeaway is there is no set path in life. Every person has to live their own life, and the future is unwritten. Your life is your own life, and it's going to be your own path. There are definite paths that are well trodden more than others, but your life is your own path, and ultimately you have to walk it. And something that's going to come through tonight is, for me, I see a lot of people that are feeling a lot of despair, and especially today after last many years of just feeling beaten down by the system, by lack of economic opportunities, by the politics. But there's a lot of people that really are feeling so depressed because they don't have meaning in their life, and they're trying to figure out like what is their raison d'etre in life. And I've always found the more you help other people, the more meaning you're going to find in your life, and the more you're going to learn to really find your path and get over those moments of depression that everyone goes through the course of a life. So with that, I'll go a little bit into my story, or a lot into my story, and talk a bit about my personal upbringing and professional life and just some of the vision. But I was born in Cleveland, Ohio. My parents grew up in a pretty like impoverished situation. My mom grew up with 7 kids in an Irish Catholic family. My dad, Hungarian neighborhood in Cleveland at that time. And I moved around a lot growing up, and I lived in like 8 different houses by the time I was 5 years old. But then I ended up settling in Western Michigan. My father got a job in aluminum anodizing as in manufacturing. And I had a very like lovely life in Western Michigan, very provincial. Lived right, on the Lake Michigan beaches, did lots of sports and playing around, wasn't the most literate person and things like that. But I just had a great, upbringing and very humbled to have that experience in Western Michigan, and then ended up going to University of Michigan. And through the course of this, my parents always kind of emphasized that there are other people in the world, that the government has a purpose to solve these issues, and that the government isn't always the enemy, because my mother's parents, for instance, were saved by the New Deal policies of getting the first public housing in Cleveland. So I didn't have this anti-government view. I've always had this view that the government can work, but it's oftentimes ran by people who don't really care about other people, but it is based on our input and our mobilization and our solidarity working with each other that can actually change the community. And my mother, she ran for school board when I was growing up as well. So I had a little bit of that political experience, or at least brought into like my path from a younger age. And then from that, I went undergrad, University of Michigan, and studied political science and philosophy. And I was very much focused on going to law school. And I was in a relationship at that time. And like so many relationships, when you're 22, it's the entire world. And I was going to law school in Southern California to follow a girl who was going to medical school. And we ended up breaking up. And it was simply because she asked the most mature question, was like, do not go to law school just for me, go to law school for you. And then I really thought about that. And I was like, well, I actually wasn't ready to go to law school. I wanted to get more experience. I hadn't even traveled abroad outside of, Canada before then. And so I deferred law school, and I did a long hike on the Pacific Crest Trail for 400 miles. And I decided that I needed another year off, and I ended up waiting tables, moving to Albuquerque, stay with a friend on his couch for a year in 2002, waiting tables at night and substitute teaching during the day, saved up a good amount of money, and then went to Europe for the first time and backpacked across Europe. And during this time, we were in the run up to the Iraq War, the US invasion in Iraq. And my father, he was in Vietnam, he got drafted, and he never thought we would be dumb enough to go invade another country like we did in Iraq. Yet when I was hiking the Pacific Crest Trail and all the media I was reading, it was like this decision was already made. We were going into Iraq. And when I ended up getting to Europe, we had just started the invasion in March 2003. And so that also really created a lot of discontent in just my feelings towards society, towards my country, towards the US. And I realized then that the heterodox lifestyle of, college, go to law school, get a good paying job, get married, all these other things, I was off that path, and I was off the orthodox path and into like the heterodox kind of view of things. So when I was in Europe too, I was able to kind of really meet some great people and see, beautiful parts of Europe. And on the Eurail pass, it was awesome. There's not very good rail system in the United States. And I stopped in Paris at this Shakespeare and Company bookstore, which I'm going to bring up later. But anyone who's been to Paris, if you've been to Cathedral Notre Dame. In the Spanish Quarter, there's this Shakespeare and Company bookstore, and there's a lot of writers who've passed through there, and they actually have beds in the store, and there are writers who live there, and they also publish there, but then they have to work and they get paid, but they're living like right in one of the most culturally rich parts of the city right there. And I was like, that is the coolest thing ever. I was very interested in writing at the time and learning more music and being a writer myself. And I was like, I want to go, work at Shakespeare and Company bookstore. But I never did. And I ended up coming back from Europe, and I got the travel bug in me. And I was at the crossroads. I was supposed to go to law school in Southern California or not. And I ended up applying to Peace Corps and going to Zambia. And that was one of the major first major crossroads after deferring law school. And so Peace Corps in Zambia, when I heard Zambia, I was thinking Zimbabwe. I didn't even actually know where Zambia was. That's how ignorant I was in the geography. And for anyone who may be looking up where Zambia is right now, it is in Southern Africa. So you got South Africa, Botswana, and then Zambia, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. And I lived in a very rural area, no electricity, no running water, cooking over an open fire. It was a 3-hour bike ride literally to the Peace Corps house where there was electricity and refrigeration and things like that. And I just got to see a lifestyle that I could have only seen by this gift given to me by the United States government. And this idea of sending Americans abroad, they kind of, it was packaged like you're doing international development, but what it really is, the value of it is giving Americans a new understanding of what the world is and learning about the world through this travel. And we did some development in rural distance education, learned a lot about just the challenges of living in a place with very little infrastructure. And then also learning just about another culture and then trying to explain my culture while being extremely culturally isolated in a country that I'm listening to shortwave radio on the BBC every day about what we're doing in Iraq and trying to talk about that. So I came back in 2007. I ended up extending for a third year in Peace Corps Zambia. And when I came back in 2007, I was looking at potentially getting a job in Washington, D.C. doing Peace Corps recruitment. And I was also wasn't sure I was going to get the job. So I was kind of like, okay, I'm still a little tired. I want to travel more. I'm not sure the United States is for me. And so I started looking at teaching English as a second language in Korea. And the plan was to go to South Korea, teach English for a year, save up cash. And then there was this amazing language program in Yemen. And this was before all of the tragedy of Yemen over the past decade has really happened. And it was this incredible program where I could learn Arabic and live in Yemen in the old city of Sana'a. And I was like, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to travel through Southeast Asia, end up in Yemen, and then come back after that, and then maybe go to grad school, and I'll have my book done and all this other stuff. But despite failing the first interview of Peace Corps recruitment in Mid-Atlantic region, they called back like 3 weeks later, right when I was like a few days from sending my passport to South Korea to get the actual visa to start the program. So 2007, I end up moving to Washington, D.C., and I'm doing outreach and recruitment with the Peace Corps. And it's a really good job where I'm getting paid to talk about the Peace Corps to people who want to hear about it. Because obviously, when I first came back from the Peace Corps, that's all I could talk about. And, most people would get very bored and just like their eyes would roll over. So this was a very good experience. It was a steady, 40-hour-a-week job. I was living in a little box in DuPont Circle. And at the same time was able to travel a little bit in West Virginia, trying to do some recruitment out there, in North Carolina and Virginia as well. And at that time, I was looking at grad school, looking at grad schools, public universities, because I didn't want to go into debt going to American University or George Washington or Georgetown. So I was looking at George Mason and University of Maryland, and University of Maryland also had a Peace Corps fellowship through that. So I ended up applying for that. And then another crossroads happened where I was presented with this opportunity to go to Jamaica to do a short-term 6-month contract for emergency medicine. And I had just got my EMTB. And my boss at the time at Peace Corps was like, oh, you don't want to do that. You want to stay in the Peace Corps. You're a civil servant now. And that what that means is like, once you're in, you can start accumulating years and things like that. If you break that right now, you know, you're losing a good thing. And for me, part of me, you know, was like, okay, that makes a lot of sense. But the other part of me was like, when am I going to have this opportunity again? I've always wanted to live in Jamaica. One of the first albums I got was Bob Marley Legends in 7th grade, and wanted to, and I love warm water, and let's do this. Let's go to Jamaica. So I end up going to Jamaica for 6 months and come back and go to grad school at University of Maryland School of Public Policy. Focus on international security, economic policy. And for about 2 years, I'm in grad school, and I'm having a lot of conflict with a lot of the professors, you know, even who are trying to teach international development from a very high level academic, and not really wanting to engage on the fact that my experience was everywhere I went, everyone wanted electricity, everyone wanted running water, everyone wanted a job, employment, everyone wanted housing. And I realized, like, these are universal values, and why can't we at least settle on this as a baseline, and then we can talk about agency and ethics and all these other things. But that was my experience. So after my first year at School of Public Policy, I realized this wasn't helping my grades by challenging people's orthodoxies that they've spent their entire lives writing books on. So finished the second year kind of underwhelmingly. And, you know, looking at coming out of grad school, I'm $35,000 in debt, and I'm trying to figure out what my next move is. And like so many people in college, you're doing these internships, and oftentimes you're not getting paid, and you're also trying to figure out you know, like, where are you going to get your opportunity, where are you going to get your break. And I ended up getting my break looking at USAID. I was even throwing my hat into working in Afghanistan because they were so desperate. And even though I didn't believe in Afghanistan, I didn't believe in the policy in Afghanistan, I realized, like, if I do that for a year and I don't get hurt, and I don't hurt anyone, I can at least pay off my debt and hopefully do some good in the process. And but I also applied to a PhD program at Howard University in Africa Studies and wanted to focus on AFRICOM, and I ended up getting into that and ended up getting on like a delayed cycle for the Afghanistan job. And during one of my internships, I met a person who was a political appointee at USAID, and she worked in the Africa Bureau, and we connected, and I applied for the job, and I was able to get a 1-year contract under one of the 26 USAID mechanisms that's not a foreign service officer, and did that for a year. And then from that, as that was ending, I jumped to another contract in this office that focuses on conflict and humanitarian assistance. And it was really focused on a lot of communications on this side. And during that time, while I was in grad school and my first year at USAID, I was really interested in everything that was going on with Occupy Wall Street. And I realized that media is kind of the tip of the spear of trying to get your ideas across, of trying to organize people and really trying to make changes from the activist bottom up to the top. And so I was taking classes at DCTV, which is just a public access with an awesome staff, awesome, very inexpensive lessons and education on technical field recording, editing, production. They have great studios. It's right at in Brookland. And took a bunch of classes and then really kind of like sold myself like, hey, I'm this videographer. And that's how I got the second job at USAID, where I was doing communications in this conflict humanitarian zone. And during that time, that's when I was like able to pay off my debt, and some of my negative views of the world became a little less negative when I felt some agency, when I wasn't under the pressure of this economic under the economic pressure of being in debt and having to make payments and things like that. And so I was able to save up a little money. And during that time, I was also really interested in developing like a farm. So I worked with some folks, and this was kind of, I wore the Monday through Friday, 40-hour a week work at USAID. And then I was also this bureaucratic entrepreneur on the side. And what I'm about to tell you, I can write the book on how not to start a business. But that being said, I ended up starting a company called Soul Shakedown. And from that, it was an LLC, and it's Soul Shakedown DC. And I was doing a lot of video work around Occupy Wall Street and some of these activist groups, and just using iMovie and things like that, and just trying to learn through doing, and just keep making things and learning and learning. And some of the work is a lot better than the other work. But I also was met with 5 other people, and because of like the 2008 crash and a lot of things going on, we got into this permaculture idea of like, okay, we're gonna buy some land, and it's gonna be our prepper bug out community that we can also use for food, event space, and it can be like an Airbnb type thing as well for revenue. And we pulled our money together, and it was me, my girlfriend at the time, and 4 other people. And we bought this 15-acre place just south of Berkeley Springs, and we called it Liberty Route. And it's just beautiful, beautiful place out in West Virginia, and working during the week, and then 2 weekends a month doing the 2-hour drive each way, and just really enjoying it. But doing a lot of grinding, a lot of 60, 80-hour work weeks to try to make this happen, this vision happen. And then on the side, on top of that, trying to also do some activism. And after a while, the Liberty Route dream kind of started fading, because it was just 6 people. We didn't have a great business plan. We didn't have everything really locked down going into it. And life happens, and people start pulling away and things like that. So that was a lesson learned. And then from that as well, I started, keep thinking about like, okay, well, what about this media thing that I'm really interested in? And so I created Empathy Media Lab as I was working at USAID to really focus on like this idea of like a publishing company, an event space, and also an artist studio. So in that meantime, I jumped from another office at USAID to Power Africa, and I was doing communications for a pretty high level Obama initiative, a presidential initiative that was looking at increasing generation of power in Africa, and also increasing connections. So electrical connections. And that was like okay, this is actually something that I'm really interested in, is like infrastructure, energy. So I learned a lot through Power Africa, while slowly kind of putting together this Empathy Media Lab. And the administration happened, and I was starting to get pretty disgusted with everything of doing international development work, while I felt my country in the United States was falling apart. And so I wanted to focus more on domestic activism. I wanted to focus more on labor issues, and it was a 2020 election. So another kind of crossroads in my life, and I ended up leaving USAID, and I was able to save up some cash, and I was like, this is the time in my life. I'm 41 years old, and I'm going to take a sabbatical, and I'm going to see where it leads, and I'm able to kind of make this move. So I started doing Empathy Media Lab full time to focus on labor, political economy, art, and culture. And some people have asked, like, why empathy? And it's almost like when I came up with this, the concept of Empathy Media Lab, 2017, about 2016, 2017, empathy wasn't quite as ubiquitous as it is now. And it's getting to a point where I'm sometimes even like, okay, empathy is now being used for marketing to make money, which has nothing to do with empathy. And but this is the brand that I'm going to stick with, because the concept of empathy is to try to get everyone to understand where everyone else is coming from. It's not about agreement and things like that. And there is this tension between the harmony of interest, where your gain is my gain, and the zero-sum game, where your gain is my loss and my gain is your loss. And I really want to come with this harmony of interest. And most people in the world want the same things. They want, and there is this harmony that your gain can be my gain. Our gain together can be everyone's gain. There is, though, a faction, and we can find it both internally and externally, and in the micro and macrocosm of the universe, but there is the zero-sum game. And we often find that these factions and organizations and this certain pathology of thinking is what is winning and taking over much of the political economic system. Another thing about empathy is that James Baldwin talks about this a lot, where when you're going through suffering, you feel like your suffering is the greatest suffering that has ever happened in the world, and that your suffering is unique. And the fact is, when you look around, everyone has gone through suffering, will go through suffering, and may be going through suffering right now. And the suffering, if you can empathize with each other on the suffering concept, you can actually build bridges with each other. But it requires a step of understanding what your own thoughts are, and you have to make that choice. You have to make that effort to want to understand where someone's coming from to help build that bridge. So why labor, political economy, art, and culture? Well, it's, obviously a huge umbrella. Labor, I've learned, I've been an unorganized worker. I've not been in labor unions. Myself, my grandfather on my mom's side, he was in the steel mills in Cleveland, and he always spoke highly of the labor unions. And my mom spoke highly of the labor unions growing up, and the teachers unions and things like that. But myself, even at USAID, there's a very strong Foreign Service Officer Union, but I was one of the temporary contracts. So in some ways, I wasn't undermining the union, but I definitely was an unorganized worker. But the union solidarity concept it's both a means and an end, in the sense that it's democracy in the workplace. Now the unions, let's get it over with and just say it, unions can be a pain in the ass. They can be a difficult place to come to consensus and things like that. But the union is the democracy in the workplace. And it's the only way to have a power block that can actually counter what management may be saying. And on top of that, the people on the floor who are actually doing a lot of the production, a lot of the services on the floor, they're going to be the most equipped to make the business work better. They're going to see ways to improve the business. They're going to see ways to make it safer. And so by increasing the support for labor on that side too, you're going to improve the business operations. And I think labor should obviously share a huge part of the fruits of the labor as you're going through it. So labor, I think is key to going forward in our system and throughout the world, and organizing not only locally and nationally, but internationally as well, and holding and having solidarity with workers in China, Vietnam, and anywhere else in the world where there may be exploitation going on, and holding our own transnational corporations to the same standards that we want to be held here, that for anything that they do abroad. Political economy is, oftentimes we hear just economics, but when you go back not too long ago, they would never have separated economics from politics. So economics and politics is always going to be connected. Economics can never be separated from politics. Political economy, when you think about every currency that's issued, it's coming from a government. Taxes, the markets are enforced by laws that are dependent on a government. So it's always political economy. And you have a lot of people in economics who have no history background in economics, and no understanding of what the classical understanding of economics is. So bringing in political economy and looking at industrial policy, looking at infrastructure, looking at things like water, food, energy, transportation, communication, education, healthcare, welfare state, those type of things are all very important. And then art and culture, in some ways that's going to shape your labor and your political economy. The culture is responding to it, but if you can bring higher levels of love, beauty, justice, and things like that into your art, into your culture, and culture can be everything from religion to language to food, and art can be anything from music to writing to visual arts to performance arts and things like that. That is going to have an impact on your political economy and in how you organize people in your labor circles. So the revenue model right now for Empathy Media Lab is looking at, right now I do consultancies on the side. I worked closely with Labor Radio Podcast Network as it has gotten off the ground, and just a little plug on that. It was started by this guy, Chris Garlock, who is the lead communicator of the AFL-CIO Washington, DC Metro Council. And he's on Your Rights at Work on WPFW 89.3. And he's got like 3 different podcasts. And then he's also kind of running this on the side. And during 2020, when I was like, in my gap year doing my sabbatical, I was so interested in labor. Somebody put me in touch with him. And so then I just started volunteering and started helping with editing a lot of podcasts, helping with the website and things like that. And he was also interested in some of the work that I was doing in my gap year in 2020, because I did a labor documentary series where I went to Pittsburgh, Detroit, Michigan, Benton Harbor, Michigan, Cleveland, and in Chicago, and did a bunch of labor kind of history activist films. And he used some of the audio for some of his podcasts, and that's how we got connected. So it's almost like when you put yourself out there, things will start happening, but there is that first step of really trying to put yourself out there. I've also been lucky enough, in 2014, I was through the funding of USAID and through the work at USAID, I was able to buy a house. It's in Hyattsville, and buying the house, I bought the title to the house. The bank owns it for another 28 years, or I guess I refinanced, but 27 years. But in this house, I've been focused on creating a podcast studio. I converted my living room into a music practice space that we're going to be doing a lot more live streaming for music over the winter. And then in the backyard doing an event space, and we've held some weddings there, and have held some different types of art variety shows with comedy and music and activism as well. So those are kind of the 2 lanes, and then the third lane is publishing. So I've been interviewing many different people, everything from authors and learning the art of podcasting. And over the course of the year, I was able to do about 170 podcasts and met a lot of good people. I use it, the podcast, obviously, to get out these ideas, but I'm also been finding my own voice because I've been so much behind the camera. And I think a big part of what everyone really should be trying to do is you need to find your own voice. Everyone has their own voice. And for me, asking questions, hearing my voice, that I'm uncomfortable listening to, trying to speak more eloquently, being a better listener when I'm asking the questions, not just reading from the script, but really trying to engage. This is going to be a lifelong project, and there's no ceiling where it's like, okay, I've mastered this. I think you can always get better, and you can see a lot of podcasters and people who do interviews for their life work. They make it look like seamless and easy, but it comes through thousands of hours of effort to get to that level. And the publishing too, as I'm going into the new year, I'm looking at, as I mentioned, the live stream studio. I'm working on the philosophy of political economy project. So it's kind of looking at developing a pedagogy on political economy and philosophy that I did not receive even at the School of Public Policy, which is right down the road at University of Maryland, where no one spoke about the New Deal. No one spoke about how we went from a depression with no banks working in 1933 to being able to rebuild 70,000 bridges and 10,000 schools and hospitals, and how this happened. And most people have completely lost understanding that even when you're completely bankrupt, there is still this way that the government can reorganize finance to not only rebuild the entire country, but also provide union wage jobs for everyone. And that I believe that employment is a right, and that the government should be ensuring full employment, especially in these hard times. And looking a little bit more, I'm going to be doing a lot more work with Labor Radio Podcast Network, and going into the future, doing more live streaming and doing some more short films and documentaries and things like that. So I'm just going to do one more short one, and this one was around the 100-year anniversary of the Battle of Blair Mountain, which it took place in West Virginia. Most people do not know about it.
Remembering the Battle of Blair Mountain. 100 years ago, in 1921, a multiracial uprising of Union coal miners commandeered trains and cars across the state of West Virginia and emptied armories of their contents as they marched to the town of Mingo, where 100 of their fellow Union miners were being held without charge by the corrupt authorities. Somewhere around 15,000 miners engaged in 3 days and nights of crossfire with thousands of the more well-to-do members of West Virginia society, including every cop in the entire state and all the gun thugs and the mine operators could find available to hire. The bosses used the racial divide in the U.S. to keep the working class in a constant state of conflict. So much of the labor movement of the day rejected this strategy and employed their own strategy of inclusion. Of the 15,000 or so people laying siege to Mingo at the end of August of that year, an estimated 2,000 of them were black. This was a multiracial uprising of unprecedented scale. During the 3 days that the miners were trying to liberate their comrades imprisoned in Mingo, dozens of people were killed, the total numbers never to be known. Thousands of women of all backgrounds were actively involved with the struggle, coordinating essential logistics like food and medical care for the thousands of men under arms. Planes were flown in from bases hundreds of miles away to drop bombs on the Union miners. There is so much more that can be said about what led to both the Tulsa pogrom and the multiracial uprising in West Virginia, which both happened within months of each other in 1921. The impact of the unspeakably horrendous bloodbath known as World War I, along with the terribly devastating global pandemic that it gave rise to, would be hard to overstate. In the face of such a long-standing history of white supremacy and settler colonialism, so much of the labor movement explicitly rejected that nonsense. It's so important that all of these things be remembered. There is another America. Remember it. Those miners died for you. You should at least know who they were. And then, let's all follow in their footsteps. Long live the multiracial uprising in the hills of Appalachia. in 1921. Long live the Battle of Blair Mountain.
To the company store.
What a journey. I do want to ask you, because unbelievable. I mean, your life is, what did you called it? The orthodox and the unorthodox,
Heterodox and
possible
orthodox.
paths that we've got. You've had the most unorthodox. You're a perfect example of lifelong learning, right? And learning through life. It's really, really incredible. And I appreciate your tension. It sounds like one of the themes of this is, should I do it this way or should I do it the old fashioned way, right? Should I go to graduate school or should I take a year off and do something else? It's just really inspirational. It makes me want to ask you about your work with Empathy Media Lab now. Do you see this as your destination, or do you have your sights on something after this? I mean, it sounds like it's an incredible, experiment. And I'm just curious to know what you're thinking about next.
Yeah, so I didn't tie it in, but the idea of like the art hostel idea, where while I was in Europe, I was staying at a lot of hostels, and I was like, oh, this is really interesting. And the idea of being able to create a space where artists can come and create art and you can do work and things like that. Right now, I'm trying to put in all my effort to make this project work. And, like with anything in life, you got to take some risk and you got to be willing to fail. But right now I'm all in on this, and I'm going to find myself interested in politics and trying to make the world a better place, and while also doing my own creative work and collaborating with good people, for the rest of my life. So if it's not Empathy Media Lab, then it may be something else. But for right now, I do have several contracts, some other things may be coming in. So things are starting to move.
Mm-hmm. Well, it also sounds like what you're doing is weaving things together, right? I mean, you're pulling so many different strands into this one multi-part effort that, I can see where you can do a lot within the structure that you've gotten developed here. Yeah, that's great. I have a question about Media Lab also, and and then there are a couple questions in the chat that I hope we can get to also. Who do you see as your audience for the work that you're doing with Empathy Media Lab?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it is very varied. So in some ways, the labor communities but everyone works, not everyone, but most people are working class. And so that's a pretty broad audience. And then the people who are going to be interested in political economy and policy, that's going to be more focused towards the policymakers, politicians, bureaucrats, those type of things, professors and students who are interested. And then the art and culture, I think, trying to seed some of these ideas, on the TikTok, into the metaverse and wherever else it's going to try to bring in something a little higher consciousness than just consumption and things like that.
That's interesting. I was thinking that this would be my last comment, but I'll say it while I'm thinking about it. Because have you ever thought about becoming a teacher? I mean, my goodness, what a wealth of experience and knowledge you bring to the table.
No, and I've taught, every bunch of different ages, and I need to write my book. That I'm hoping that this political economy pedagogy, even at 1 minute videos, and if I do, a couple hundred of them, that'll be enough to put a book together and use that as kind of a school. And I love teaching, and I learned so much teaching, and you got to prepare a lot for teaching, and every generation, every student can bring new perspectives that you can really learn from.
Yeah. And I mean, the format of education is changing all the time. So yeah, I think you're going to be well prepared for whatever's coming down the road there. That's terrific. There is a really interesting question. I think you can probably see the chat too, so you can see this as well. Someone is asking about how white privilege might have affected the work that you do.
Oh yeah. Well, as you can see, I'm of the pink tone, the whiter tone here. So I've been, I've been given a lot, right? I've economically, socially, culturally, I've taken more than I've given. And in that view and coming to that realization that I've taken more than I've given, if I die today, then I will have regrets because I've taken more than I've given. And so my goal is to continue to try to build things that I've been given and make sure everyone is given that. And that's not just in the United States. That's where it's like everyone should have electricity, everyone should have, everything. And so like the white privilege, obviously being white in the United States, especially for the last 40 years of my upbringing, that is the most privileged, race and things like that. At the same time, what the video showed too is that a lot of the racial divisions are being stoked to keep us from working together too. So I think to try to understand each other, and through that empathy, I've learned a lot through being humble of my own, hubrises and realizing my own errors and things like that. But I do think like the working class solidarity needs to transcend the acknowledging the race, acknowledging the divisions, acknowledging the differences in immigration and everything else. But it's only through the union solidarity that we are going to be able to move forward and not just be picked apart and divided again and again.
Yeah. Wow. That's like a whole discussion, isn't it? Yeah, that's really thought provoking. Okay, so there are two other questions here, and one of them is from Anne Marcel. She's asking you about the hardest question that you've had to grapple with doing this work. I mean, these are not easy questions, are they? You guys have got great questions here.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate them so much. So there's been times where I'm interviewing people. Okay, so I did this interview for USAID, and it was in Haiti, and it was looking at the work that USAID had done after the earthquake. And we went up to the north of Haiti to celebrate this new this Korean textile firm. And my job was to interview this Haitian woman who worked there and to try to get a success story out of it, right? And I know a lot of history, not people know more than me, but I know a good deal of history. I know a lot of the issues with Haiti, and this Korean firm was kicked out of Guatemala for labor practices and set shop up in northern Haiti. And this was like the big celebration of USAID and the Clinton initiative, and Hillary Clinton at that time was Secretary of State. And I'm in this room interviewing this woman at the plant where there is this textiles, and it was almost like kind of like a sweatshop that I'm going in, I'm filming, like, this is crazy, this is insane that I'm in here. And I have these like activist, thoughts, and just being like, this is crazy, it's a success story on this. And I'm in this room, and the boss is around and her manager's around, and I don't speak Creole, I don't speak French, and I'm trying to ask these questions. And I realize in that situation, there is no truth that I'm going to get from her. Unfortunately, it is just I gotta take the fact that I was there, and I was able to bear witness of the fact that we've so-called, the West has put in hundreds of billions of dollars in Haiti, and yet this 100-kilometer road from St. Mark, which is just outside of Port-au-Prince, up to Cap Haitian, is like a bombed out road that took 4 hours to drive up to. And I'm sitting at the bar talking to this Inter-American bank guy from I think Ecuador, and he's like, yeah, it costs about 10 million per kilometer. So for for $1 billion, this road could be built, and yet we're celebrating all these things. There's no road, and so so that's part of me taking, right? So what I owe now is to not only try to tell this person's story, but to use what I've been given and try to do some good with it.
I think that is it may be a great place to stop, to keep us thinking, because I think when you talk about empathy, just to kind of full circle around, having empathy for people that we don't necessarily agree with, or who are doing things that we don't necessarily agree with is maybe one of the hardest things to put that into practice. And I think for all of us, if we can have that as kind of a mantra, like, here I am in this difficult place, let me see how I can apply empathy to what I'm facing right now. I think that's an excellent lesson for us. Yeah. Evan, thank you so much for coming in this evening. This has been really, really inspiring, really incredible. And I hope that we can keep this conversation going.
Thank you. And just with the final minute too, I really want to thank everyone for, engaging, and I'm open on LinkedIn. I'm open if you want to just try to be like, oh, get connected with that person. I can try to make the introduction. If you have story ideas, things like that you want to collaborate on, let's definitely talk, even if you're looking for a place to publish something and you don't know where to go. And just the key takeaways, our attention is our most valuable possession in life, and there is no set path, and service to others is where we're going to find the most meaning. So thanks again.